Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now today we're going to be doing kind of a revisited episode. We're going to make chocolate mousse cake again. It's been a long time since I've done this episode, but we're going to switch things up just a little bit. A lot of you asked constantly how to make it so that way it doesn't have raw egg components in it, and it does seem to be a big concern for a lot of people. And there is different ways you can go about it. You can leave the eggs out altogether and just kind of make like a chocolate whipped cream kind of concoction, so that way it kind of is your mousse. But a lot of people don't feel like that's, real mousse, and they want to do a really good job. So what we're going to do is we're going to use cooked components, because all we need to do is just cook the components to the point where they are food safe. So 150 to 165 degrees. Obviously the higher you go, the safer it is. And then all we're going to do is we're going to treat it the same way we would have. So instead of just using egg whites whipped up to a French meringue, we're going to cook it with some sugar, or warm it up with some sugar to 150 to 165 degrees and make a Swiss meringue. And for the egg yolks, we're going to mix it with some sugars. When you mix things with the sugar, it raises their cooking points. So that way they don't scramble or curl or whatnot. So that's why we add the sugar. So this recipe does have a little bit more sugar than the original recipe. Now, that being said, we're going to add the sugar to the egg yolk, some of it, and then we're going to warm it up to 150 to 165 degrees. All right, so why don't we just go ahead and get right into it. So in this bowl and in this bowl, I have 4 eggs separated. So if you need to see a video on how to do that, I have a video on how to separate eggs. So 4 egg yolks and 4 egg whites. No sugar yet, because we don't want them to chemically cook or sit around or anything like that, especially since I'm doing the video, so I'm doing a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, so I really don't want them sitting around. In this bowl, I have 12 ounces of bittersweet chocolate chips, and I do recommend bittersweet because we are adding a little bit more sugar to this recipe, but feel free to use any kind of chocolate you want except for white chocolate, because white chocolate does require gelatin to set up because it's just so delicate. And I do have a video on that, but hopefully we'll be doing a revisited episode for that as well. I'm going to have about 1 pound of heavy cream being whipped up at some point in this bowl, so I'm keeping this clean to the side. And that reminds me, in this bowl, make sure you wipe it out with a little bit of vinegar to make sure it's extra clean. No soap residue, no fat residue, or anything like that that can inhibit egg whites from whipping up. We are going to cover the Swiss meringue method of whipping up eggs just because it's very crucial to this episode. It'd be really silly not to have that in there. And here I have 2 ounces of unsalted butter, super soft at room temperature. I left it out like almost all day, so it's super soft. Now the recipe does say to melt it down, but we're going to work with it just soft, so that way we can manipulate with the temperatures a little bit more. Because we want everything to basically be about the same temperature. We don't want anything too hot, especially chocolate, because if the chocolate's too hot and it hits the heavy cream, what's going to happen is you're going to have chocolate chips. So you want everything to be kind of in the same temperature range. So hopefully having a slightly cool butter when it's still slightly at room temperature will help warm up everything else, or help cool off everything else, so everyone's kind of in the same temperature range. And to that effect, we are going to make things in a certain order. So we're going to make the egg yolks first, to make sure they cool off first. Then we're going to make the heavy cream to make sure it kind of warms up to room temperature. And then we're going to do the egg whites last, because we whip it up so much, it's pretty much going to be the right temperature pretty quickly. Even if it is still a little bit warm, it's not a huge deal, because by that time everyone else will be at room temperature, and we are going to fold it in last. So you're going to kind of see how the process works out, and you can always just wait a few minutes to wait for something to catch up to the temperature that you're looking for or anything like that. It's just very crucial that you keep an eye on your chocolate, because you don't want your chocolate getting hard. So if you're going to wait, make sure you keep the chocolate melted, or keep it soft, or keep it moving, or something like that once you already add some parts to the chocolate, like the butter or the egg yolks. And you'll see, and I'll repeat myself throughout the episode. So there are a few things you want to do before you start making your mousse, because it is a chocolate mousse cake. So I have here about a half, maybe a little bit less than a half of a chocolate cake layer. This is my shortening-free chocolate cake. On the original one, it does have shortening, but I took it out and readjusted the recipe, so that way if you want shortening in your cake, or if you don't want shortening in your cake, I have both recipes, and they're made the exact same way. It's just substituted out with a little bit of difference in the liquid and the fat. Cool it off, trim it off, and then we're going to use that later. So set it aside. Now in this episode, we're not going to use any raspberry filling or fresh raspberries or anything like that. A lot of you asked if we could leave it out, and of course you can leave it out, or you can put anything else you want in there, strawberries, anything your heart desires, bananas, maybe a layer of peanut butter. Do a little bit of peanut butter mousse though. I think straight peanut butter is a little intense. And then once you figure out what you're going to do for that, you want to make sure your cake ring is ready. Now here I have an 8-inch cake ring, but I think it got a little misshapen because my 8-inch cardboards don't really fit in it right. So I took a 9-inch cardboard and cut it down. And what you want to do through the top, make sure it fits into your cake ring. Okay, so I'm gonna have to trim it down again, or maybe force it in through. But make sure it fits into your cake ring, so that way because what we're going to do to unmold it is we're going to push a can up through it. So what works really, really well is one of those cake pans with a removable bottom. But if you're like me and don't like to have a ton of cake pans in your house, this works just fine. And cake rings are really cool because, you can use them for a variety of things, including baking them in the oven and stuff like that. So anyway, enough of the cake ring love. So I will show you how to put everything together before we make the mousse, don't you worry, or before we fill it with the mousse. Alright, so on a double boiler, we're going to go ahead and warm up our egg yolks first. Now this is 4 egg yolks with 1 ounce of granulated sugar, and we're going to warm it up to 150 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit to make sure everything is nice and food safe. And it's going to go pretty quickly, it should anyway, because it's such a small amount. You want to whisk it to make sure the temperature is getting evenly distributed, make sure no one's getting cooked on the bottom or anything like that, and make sure the sugar is nice and stirred in as well. And you want to make sure that once your sugar touches your egg yolks, that you go ahead and whisk it together right away, because egg yolks are super susceptible to chemically cooking from the contact with the sugar. So you want to make sure to get that moving right away. So we're going to use the same whisk and the same thermometer probe for the egg whites as well. So you want to make sure to wipe them off as well before you use that with your egg whites, because again, any little bit of fat can inhibit the egg whites from whipping up into a nice meringue. So I'm almost at the temperature that I need it to be at. You can see it was very, very quick. I was talking to you pretty much the entire time. And then we're going to go to you already know how to whip up heavy cream, so I'm not going to show you how to do that. So when I come back, I'll be warming up the egg whites. Alright, so we're back on the double boiler with our egg whites, and this time 2 ounces of granulated sugar, so there's 3 ounces total in the mousse. And we're going to warm it up to 150 to 165 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, it should go pretty quickly because it's such a small amount. And this was the bowl that I whipped my heavy cream in, so I cleaned it out really well, wiped it out with a little bit of vinegar to make sure that it was super extra clean. And we're almost to 150 already. Alright, so once our egg whites reach the proper temperature, we're going to go ahead and whip them up to about medium peaks. Okay, you can see that our meringue is at medium peaks. It's already starting to break down just a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and increase the sugar in the egg whites by another ounce to make sure that doesn't happen to you. Alright, so we've got all of our components ready to go. This is our melted chocolate fresh off the double boiler. Make sure there's no chocolate chips still hanging out in here. I think we're good to go. So now we're going to go ahead and add in our 2 ounces of unsalted butter. I'm just going to mix that in well. Okay, and before our butter is completely added, we're going to go ahead and add in our cooked egg yolks. Okay, now at this point, our chocolate should be pretty much room temperature. Shouldn't be hard and sitting up and cold, and it shouldn't be very hot either, because now we're going to add in our heavy cream. So if it's too hot, then it's going to melt the heavy cream as we add it in. So if it's not at room temperature, go ahead and let it sit for a few minutes until it comes down. You don't want to pop in the fridge or anything like that, because you don't want to accidentally set it up and create chocolate chips. And if it's just a little bit too warm, your heavy cream will cool it down too. So don't worry about it melting just a little bit of your heavy cream. Alright, so we're going to add in a scoop of our heavy cream. Just going to whisk that in. And just repeat until all of your heavy cream is added. Okay, we're almost finished. Now we're going to go ahead and add in our egg whites. You can see they started breaking down just a little bit. So again, I'm going to add another ounce or 2 of sugar. That should make your egg meringue a little bit smoother than mine. We're going to work with it though. Right now we have a pretty much stable meringue, or stable mousse. So we can go ahead and put this to the side. Alright, so again, this is my Devil's Food chocolate cake, my shortening free version. An 8-inch, supposedly, cake ring. And we're going to use it just like a cookie cutter to make sure that it's filled up the entire ring. Now we're going to put our cardboard into our cake ring. So it should fit like this, but it should still be fairly easy to remove. Take your cake layer and pop that right in. Alright, so now you have your cardboard underneath your cake layer. Now at this point, if you want to put like simple syrup on it to kind of flavor it, like rum simple syrup. So simple syrup is 1 part sugar to 1 part water brought to just a boil. And then you can add like a little bit of flavoring to that. Or you can steep in flavorings like vanilla beans and whatnot into it. So I'm just going to leave it plain just like this, just to get a move on. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and pour in our mousse. And if we're lucky, it should fill all the way to the top. Alright, so we're not all the way to the top, but we're pretty darn close. So we're going to go ahead and try to smooth this out as much as we can. And notice that I moved it to a sheet pan, so it's easier to move around, so that way the cardboard and the cake don't accidentally fall out or whatnot, and then I have chocolate mousse everywhere. And of course, you can use this chocolate mousse recipe any way you'd like. Like, let's say, for example, you just wanted to have chocolate mousse cups. Go for it. You don't have to do a whole cake. Just use chocolate mousse the way it is. All right, so kind of make sure it's nice and squeezed down. Clean out the edges a little bit. Good. All right, so we're going to go ahead and either refrigerate this overnight, or I'm going to freeze it for 4 hours and see how that comes out. It should be fine. It's chocolate mousse, and that way it'll be a little bit easier to work with, or sooner to work with, I guess I should say. Now, I will thaw it out in the refrigerator before eating it, though. But if you do want nice, clean slices, putting it in the freezer sure helps. All right, so in this pot, I made some ganache. I took, let's see, 4 ounces of heavy cream with 2 ounces of unsalted butter and brought it to a boil, and then added 8 ounces of semi-sweet chocolate chips, and then just kept stirring it until all the chocolate chips were melted. Didn't want to put in air in it. There's a few air bubbles that we can knock out, but it's not such a big deal. You don't want to like whip it up or use a whisk, for example. And the extra butter in this, usually I only put like a very little amount of butter in a ganache. The extra butter in this helps it make it smooth, it makes it more full, and the high amount of chocolate helps it really sit up nice and firm on top of the cold ganache, or a cold chocolate mousse. So after you've warmed it up and melted all the chocolate down, you want to let it cool down to like room temperature-ish. It can still be a little bit warm, especially if you decided to freeze your chocolate mousse as opposed to refrigerating it. And the reason you want to pour it hot is you don't want to accidentally melt your chocolate mousse and create this, this tunnel or this, tornado into the middle of your mousse or whatever. So you want to always just kind of just play it safe and just work with it a little bit cooler than hotter. And the other thing too is if it's very, very cold or very, very much at room temperature and you're putting it on a frozen mousse, for example, then the ganache won't move as smoothly, so you'll have a harder time smoothing it out. So keep that in mind too. And speaking of that, you can use a long knife or an offset spatula to help you smooth it out if it reaches the top of the cake rings, which hopefully this will in this case. Otherwise, we'll just kind of leave it alone. All right, so my mousse has been in the freezer for about 3 hours. I should leave it in for 1 more hour, but I think I'm going to go ahead and roll with it. It seems pretty much firm, and this ganache isn't too hot. So we're going to go ahead and pour this ganache right on. Okay, and we're going to let it smooth itself out. Okay, and I think that's smooth enough. I'm not going to try and risk my luck and make it all wrinkly. So we'll go ahead and go with that. So I'm going to put this into the fridge for about 20 minutes or so until the ganache is hard. All right, now that the ganache is set up, we can go ahead and release it. So take up your entire chocolate mousse cake, centered on that can. I'm using a larger can because it's a little bit wider, and just slide the ring down. And there you go. That comes right off just like that. So there's your finished chocolate mousse cake. Now I'm going to put this back in the refrigerator. Chocolate mousse can sit up the ganache can sit up just a little bit more. It's a little bit softer than I thought it was, but otherwise it's the finished cake. All right, so that's the cooked chocolate mousse cake. Now remember, this cake has the cooked meringue, which was used making a Swiss meringue method, and I'm going to add a couple more ounces of sugar for that, so it comes out nice and smooth and holds its shape a little bit better. And we also had a little bit of sugar in the egg yolks, so that way when we warmed them up over the stove, they didn't curdle. So once we have those cooked to food safe temperatures, it's just a matter of making it the same way as you would regular chocolate mousse. Feel free to add tons of customized, deliciousness to this. You could use different kinds of cake. You could use like a vanilla cake, for example. You could put like a filling or something in between the mousse and the cake. So like in the original episode, we had raspberries and raspberry jam, but you could do anything your heart desires. So anyway, I hope you learned a lot today. Thank you for watching. And remember, the Aubergine Chef demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.